Hello, family, and welcome back. Let's set the scene properly, because context matters, even if the internet treats it like an optional side quest. While the entire royal institution rolled out a full production for what would have been Queen Elizabeth II's 100th birthday, we got the expected spectacle. Formal receptions, carefully choreographed appearances, museum visits where everyone looks solemn in that very specific, we rehearsed this grief way. The kind of event where even the flowers probably had a PR strategy. And then there's Prince Harry. Miles away, different continent, no cameras, no curated speech, no palace briefing whispering to the press about how deeply meaningful everything is. He sends flowers. That's it. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll realize something immediately. That small, quiet gesture, it actually says more than an entire ballroom of speeches. Because here's the thing nobody wants to admit out loud. When you strip away the titles, the uniforms, the centuries of tradition, and all that gold-plated ceremony, grief becomes very simple. It becomes human. And Harry, for all the noise people love to attach to his name, has consistently shown that he operates from that space. Not the institutional one, not the how will this look tomorrow in the papers mindset, the real one. And that drives certain people absolutely insane because it ruins the narrative. You're supposed to believe he's bitter, disconnected, detached, sitting somewhere plotting his next attack on the monarchy like a cartoon villain with a dramatic soundtrack. Meanwhile, the man is sending flowers to his grandmother's resting place. No press release needed. Let's talk about that relationship for a second, because this isn't some vague, distant royal connection. Harry and the late Queen had a bond that was very clearly real. Not staged, not manufactured, not filtered through palace advisors. He's spoken about her with warmth that doesn't sound scripted. You can tell the difference. Anyone with functioning ears can tell the difference. There's a tone people use when they're reading from a briefing, and there's a tone people use when they're remembering someone they actually loved. Harry uses the second one. He talked about their last conversations, he made sure she met his children, he honored her nickname by naming his daughter Lilibet. That's not PR, that's personal. And now, years after her passing, he's still showing up in his own way, quietly, consistently, without needing applause. Now compare that to the institutional side of things, and this is where it gets a little uncomfortable. Because the royal family didn't do anything wrong, let's be clear about that. They did what they are expected to do. Public duty, national remembrance, events that reflect the scale of her legacy. That's their role. But let's not pretend it's the same thing. One is grief. The other is responsibility. One is emotional, the other is operational. And when you put them side by side, something interesting happens. Harry's approach feels more human, less polished, less filtered, less concerned with how it will be perceived. And that authenticity, it hits differently. Now, here's where the roasting comes in, because you already know certain corners of the internet cannot handle this without spiraling. You've got people out here acting like Harry sending flowers is somehow insufficient. Why didn't he attend the events? Why wasn't he there in person? Why didn't he stand next to everyone else for the cameras? Because, and try to stay with me here, not everything is about optics. Wild concept, I know. The same people who complain that the monarchy is too rigid, too performative, too stuck in tradition, are the first to demand that Harry conform to those exact same expectations. Make it make sense. They want him to be both the rebel and the rule follower at the exact same time. Break away, but only in ways that are convenient for us. Be independent, but also show up exactly where we expect you. It's like watching someone argue with themselves in real time. Meanwhile, Harry is just living his life. honoring his grandmother in a way that feels right to him, not in a way that satisfies headlines or critics or random people on the internet who think they're part of the royal decision-making team. And that's where his strength really shows, because it takes a certain kind of confidence to step away from an entire system and still hold on to your values. To say, I don't need the institution to define how I show love, respect, or grief. That's not weakness, that's independence. Let's be honest for a second. If Harry had shown up at those events, the same people criticizing him now would still find something to complain about. He looked uncomfortable. He seemed distant. Why did he stand there like that? Why didn't he smile more? It would just be a different flavor of outrage. So at some point, you realize the issue isn't what he does. It's that he exists outside the system they want him to stay in. And that's what really bothers them. Because Harry represents something inconvenient. He proves that you can leave, build your own life, and still maintain genuine connections. He didn't abandon his past. He redefined his relationship with it. That's a very different thing. And when it comes to Queen Elizabeth II, that connection clearly never disappeared. You don't name your child after someone you don't deeply respect. You don't speak about them with that level of warmth if it's all for show. You don't consistently honor them years later if it doesn't come from somewhere real. So this idea that Harry is somehow disconnected or indifferent, it falls apart the moment you look at his actions instead of the headlines. And actions, inconveniently, are harder to twist. Now, let's zoom out a little. Because what we're really looking at here is a clash of two worlds. On one side, you've got tradition, ceremony, structure, the monarchy as an institution that operates on visibility and symbolism. On the other side, you've got individuality, personal expression, a more modern approach to relationships and emotion. Harry sits firmly in that second category, and whether people like it or not, that's where a lot of the world is heading. People don't connect with perfectly staged moments the way they used to. They connect with authenticity, with sincerity, with things that feel real. A man sending flowers to his grandmother's grave without telling the world about it, that feels real. A carefully planned reception with speeches and guest lists and media coverage, that feels official. Again, both have their place, but they don't hit the same. And that's why Harry's gesture resonates more with certain audiences, not because it's louder, but because it's quieter. And sometimes, quiet carries more weight. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, because ignoring it would be too easy. There's a reason stories like this get attention. There's a reason people react so strongly to anything Harry does, even something as simple as sending flowers. It's because he challenges expectations. He doesn't follow the script. And when someone refuses to play their assigned role, it makes people uncomfortable, especially when that role is tied to something as rigid and symbolic as the monarchy. But here's the twist. That discomfort, it's also what makes him compelling. Because you never quite know what he's going to do next, not in a chaotic way, in a human way. He reacts like a person, not a position. And in a world full of carefully managed images, that stands out. So when you look at this moment, this simple act of sending flowers, it becomes more than just a gesture. It becomes a statement. Not a loud, dramatic one, not something designed to grab headlines, a quiet one. I remember. I care. I don't need to prove it to anyone. And honestly, that kind of confidence is rare, especially in a space where everything is constantly analyzed, criticized, and turned into content. Harry could have easily turned this into a public moment, a statement, a photo opportunity, a way to control the narrative. He didn't. He kept it personal. And that choice says everything. So while the institution continues doing what it does best, maintaining tradition, honoring legacy, putting on the kind of events that reflect its history, Harry continues doing what he does best, being himself. And whether people love it or hate it, that authenticity is exactly why he still commands attention, not because he's trying to, but because he isn't. And that, ironically, is what makes him stand out the most. What makes Harry's gesture land so differently is the absence of performance. Not everything meaningful needs to be turned into a televised moment with perfectly timed camera angles and carefully worded speeches. There's something almost rebellious about choosing not to perform grief when you come from a system that practically industrializes it. And that's the quiet power here. He didn't need to stand in a room full of dignitaries to prove anything. He didn't need to attach his emotions to a schedule. He just acted. Simple, direct, and refreshingly human in a space that often feels anything but. There's also a level of emotional consistency that people conveniently overlook. Harry doesn't just show up when it's trending or when the calendar tells him to. His respect for his grandmother has been steady, visible in the choices he's made over time, not just one symbolic moment. That kind of consistency is hard to fake. You can stage a single event, sure, but you can't convincingly replicate years of small, meaningful actions without it eventually feeling hollow. With him, it doesn't. And that's probably what irritates critics the most, because it removes the easy angle of calling it performative. Another thing that stands out is how intentional his distance seems to be. Not physical distance, that's obvious, but emotional boundaries. He's figured out a way to separate his personal relationships from the institution that surrounds them. That's not easy, especially when your entire identity was shaped inside that system. Yet here he is, honoring his grandmother in a way that belongs entirely to him, not to the monarchy, not to tradition, not to public expectation. That level of clarity doesn't come from rebellion alone. It comes from knowing exactly what matters and refusing to dilute it. And then there's the irony that makes this whole situation almost funny. The more understated his actions are, the louder the reaction becomes. A private gesture somehow generates more noise than an entire calendar of official events. Think about that for a second. No speech, no appearance, no press moment, and yet here we are, dissecting it, debating it, turning it into headlines. That kind of impact doesn't come from trying to dominate attention. It comes from authenticity cutting through all of the noise, whether people like it or not. There's something quietly bold about choosing simplicity when you come from a world addicted to spectacle. Harry didn't escalate, didn't try to outshine anything, didn't compete for attention. He went smaller. And weirdly, that takes more confidence. Anyone can go big when they've got the resources and the platform. Going small, knowing it'll still matter, that's a different kind of self-assurance. It says he understands that meaning isn't measured by how many people are watching. It also highlights how comfortable he seems in his own choices now. There's no visible hesitation, no sense that he's second-guessing how his actions will be interpreted. That kind of clarity doesn't appear overnight. It comes from stepping away, recalibrating, and deciding what actually aligns with you. Whether people agree with him or not almost becomes irrelevant at that point. He's not moving based on approval anymore, and that shift is very obvious. And then there's the emotional intelligence piece, which people love to ignore because it doesn't fit neat narratives. Knowing how to honor someone in a way that feels authentic to your relationship, rather than conforming to external expectations, takes awareness. It's easy to follow a script. It's harder to write your own, especially when the world is watching and waiting to critique it. Yet that's exactly what he's been doing, and whether critics admit it or not, that's part of why these moments keep resonating. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.